lot of you guys are able to make this, so that's cool. So kind of the purpose of today, want to give you guys a chance to ask any questions that you might have, and also kind of run you through a little bit of kind of the coaching philosophy for the summer. Also just hopefully make you guys a little bit more educated as far as being tennis consumers. So, you know, there's a phrase that I kind of go back to a lot. It comes from Steve Smith, who's a coach that I've kind of trained under, and it's you can't microwave tennis. And so tennis is, to me, one of the most difficult, challenging sports because it's so technical. Putting that 27-inch racket in your hand really kind of can make it difficult. It makes your whole arm, you know, feel kind of foreign at times. So anyway, so kind of one of my constant themes I go back to is you cannot microwave tennis, and it just takes a ton of work to get really good at the game. And there's so many different elements to it. And the other kind of phrase that I come back to is there's no substitute for a great beginning. And so really having solid foundation as early as you can in your tennis game makes it so you don't have to go backwards and, you know, fix things down the road. It's a lot harder to fix things later in life than it is to kind of, you know, have it right from the start. So, you know, one thing, did anybody go to state this year and get to watch the boys 6A1, like get to watch the championship match between Caden and Alex from Corner Canyon? Just to give you a little bit of background, I know, obviously we know Caden here, and we know Alex's dad a little bit. I mean, Alex has been playing for, I think, 10 years. That was a 10-year project to get him up to that level to play there. I think Caden's probably another 10 or 12-year project player. So there's never any kind of quick fixes or secret sauce. If you go on YouTube and you look at the internet, you're going to see a lot of people promising that they can fix your forehand in, 15 minutes. It never works out that way. So hopefully some of the stuff you're going to get tonight is just going to kind of help you, educate you just as a consumer. So you have a little bit more knowledge. I don't know, some of you guys might be new to the game, new tennis parents, and some of you might have been around it for a long time. So I really feel it's important. To understand tennis, you have to understand the dimensions of the court. This is a famous Vic Braden kind of teaching, kind of core teaching philosophy is if you don't understand the dimensions of the court, it's very hard to be a good player, and it's hard to understand as a parent why they're not just hitting it to where the person isn't. So we're going to step out to the court real quick, and I'm going to give you guys a little rundown on the night. Come on in. So real quick, let's start kind of dimensions of the court. Kennedy, how long's the court? 78 feet. Good job. Pop, how wide is the singles court?
30.
Doubles?
That's doubles. 27.
29, very good. 29. Okay, so the court's 29 feet in singles, it's 36 feet in doubles, and then it's 78 feet long. Okay, is a straight line. So we're playing on a court. When you think about singles, it's a long rectangle. It's almost 3 times as long as it is wide. And one of the things that surprised me, and I played tennis for a long time before I ever knew this, is if you took a rope from that baseline corner to here, and you took another line, rope from that corner into the center of the court, how many degrees is it? 19.6 degrees. So when you think about the width of the court, you're only playing with an angle variation of less than 10 degrees each direction. And so that's why tennis, you see your kid miss wide and there's a huge open court, that's why. There's only 19.6 degrees to play with, and if you go wider than that degree, you're missing left or you're missing wide. And the other thing I would give you guys a real quick, you can just kind of either come back here or feel free to come in front of the camera. This was shocking the first time this was ever done to me. If you put a blanket over the net and you stand right here, you will not see any of your opponent's court on the other side. So when we think about the net, it's a lot higher than what we think it is. It's got all these holes in it, so we can easily see our target, but we don't really always respect it until you really see the whole thing blacked out. And if you can't kind of get my perspective, I'm looking over that and all I can see is green. I can't see any of the blue court on the other side when I look straight over it. So it just really means that the the barriers to hitting the ball in the court are a lot stronger, or they're just a lot more difficult than kind of how we tend to think of it. Some other tennis math for you. Let's see. Sage, how long are the ball and the string connected, the strings and the ball connected when you hit the ball?
It's like, oh gosh, I don't know, like 0.4 seconds.
4 to 6 milliseconds. So the ball and the racket only connect for 4 to 6 milliseconds. The time that it takes for our brain to register that we've hit the ball is 8 to 10 milliseconds. The ball's already long gone before we get that sense of sensation into our brain and said, oh, I'm hitting the ball. Well, the ball's already a few feet off of your racket. So when you start to kind of understand the mathematics behind the court and the connection between the ball and the strings, it becomes really difficult to have a complicated system for stroke production. And so one of the things that we try to do from a teaching standpoint is we want to create a system that's incredibly simple. We don't want to add complicated things, and I think that's one of the things that kind of happens at the pro levels. We watch pro level players hit, and we think they must be doing so many things to make the ball do that, and it's actually the opposite. They actually have a much simpler system than your amateur player. They don't have to make what I call calculations. They just get a hit through the ball. And it really comes down to them just having really good fundamentals in terms of their ball striking. And so when the kids are gonna, if they haven't already done it with me, they're gonna get a course that's gonna kind of go through the fundamentals, but really owning that fundamental at this early stage, it's never gonna have to change as they get better, because the fundamental doesn't change. Just the speed at which you execute that fundamental has to happen faster and faster as you climb up tennis. And so that's kind of how we want to think of stroke production. Let's see. And I would say the real thing to kind of understand is the swing that we kind of create has to match the dimensions of the court that we just discussed. So if I have a swing that tends to look a little bit like a merry-go-round, I'm gonna hook a lot of balls. I'll be a little bit late, the racket comes way behind me, and I might do that. And so we tend to see a lot of players, that's an exaggeration, but we tend to see players that have very much merry-go-round type swings. It feels good, it's the easiest thing that we kind of naturally do, but it's not very good for playing consistent kind of quality tennis. So what we want to start to understand is we need circular swings from the back of the court. Circular just means that the racket's going to more or less make a C shape back here, and it's going to track out to the court, okay? So that when I do that, it tends to be very difficult to miss the ball long, and it tends to be very difficult to miss the ball wide. So when we talk about stroke production with your kids, it's going to be a lot about getting them to understand the dimensions and then just really respecting kind of the court. And if you do those things, you have the chance to be a really, good tennis player, really reach your potential. So anyways, so I think that's it for on court. We'll go back over there. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of bring up one of my favorite videos that I've come across. Let's see. There it is. I always show the kids this a ton. We'll see if anybody can pick out who this is. Don't look at the very top because you'll see it labeled. See if you can recognize the stroke. Is it viewable back there?
Oh, is that there?
That's Federer. Yeah. So I can show you this in more detail if you really can't see it later. But I always show this when we tend to think of tennis teaching, we tend to look for our kids to look like the pros. We tend to look for coaches that in a way look like the pros too. And we tend to want them to get taught as the pros currently look. And so I think one of the big holes in tennis coaching is the understanding that every pro that you see on the tour went through a developmental phase. And if we look at Federer's strokes here, he's got all the elements that we just kind of went over. So we're going to talk a lot to your kids about the the racket goes high, it goes low, it goes high, and if you just kind of look at that, it's a nice Ferris wheel. It goes out to the target. Once the ball's long gone, the racket releases. But if you watch tennis on TV and you're looking at a lot of these pro level players, we tend to get enamored by how fast and everything's happening, but we kind of forget that they went through a development period like this. So it's really important that you understand you need to instill fundamentals in your kid, and that's what's actually going to let them get to that level. My kind of pet peeve is when I go and look at a lot of kids hitting balls, there's a ton of shanking. Everybody heard the ball shank off the bottom of the racket, and that shanking comes because they go usually to immediately trying to look like pro level strokes rather than developing kind of what I would call a really good body awareness fundamentals. So part of what we're going to be doing this summer is just really giving them a foundation that then lets them kind of grow into. And you can think of it like writing. You learn your ABCs, you do your block lettering, and then you eventually get to cursive and it looks beautiful and elegant. And that's really what it has to be like at anything you tackle in life in terms of the skill. So, let's see. I want to talk a little bit too, just, we get a lot of questions, why doesn't my kid win? What's the pathway? Why are they losing? Most of it at our current level of high school, Utah youth tennis, it's going to come down to technique. It really is. We sometimes get caught up in like, oh, they're nervous, they're feeling under pressure, they can't compete. I would argue that almost every time a parent or a kid themselves associates the idea that they can't compete because they're not mentally tough enough, it actually comes back to technique. Good technique it'll do the work for you. You have to make minimal calculations. If I say the word calculation, it means this. Think about this. If I had my racket wide open to the sky and I want the ball to go in the court, I've got to make a calculation of closing my racket angle at the right degree. Otherwise, my ball goes long, and if I overclose my racket, it goes in the net. So we tend to see at this level tons of calculations going on in the strokes. We want to get your kid to have really like no calculating going on. They're able just to come and hit through the ball cleanly. And guess what? The ball starts going in and they start getting confident because their technique allows them to. So it really becomes important to understand kind of the chicken and the egg there. It's really almost always going to boil down to just making sure that we've got these fundamentals sound. And there's a real progression to it. We're going to walk through where we do it underhand tossing. They're going to be shadow swinging off of cones. They're going to be tossing balls to each other from across the court, and then we're getting it into live hitting. If it can withstand all of those stages, then it's time to put it into match play. Can it hold up into match play? And a lot of times it takes a little bit longer for that to go, but this is one of the real values of, kind of just doing the video analysis is so key. This is kind of what I do on a number of matches. I mean, you can kind of see here we are in a real match, and this this kid is going to hit a merry-go-round forehand. You can kind of just see his racket's going to go from out to in. He missed a lot of forehands in this match, and he's just got to come back to understand. Okay, here's my match play example. I don't have fundamentals yet. Haven't been not quite able to do it the way I was taught, and that takes time. So that's another kind of step in the progression. So it's really getting the fundamentals down. Then it's can you execute the fundamentals within that kind of environment. And once you can do that, your level will just start to really shoot up. But until you get to the point where your fundamentals don't break down in match play, it's going to be very difficult to really progress. And the other thing that I kind of think of is, why do kids stop loving tennis? Well, it's a difficult sport, and a lot of the difficulty comes when you stop getting better. And so if you don't get the fundamentals down, you hit your cap way earlier than you would have had you had the good fundamentals where you're not making those calculations. And so that's kind of, some of us have to go back to the drawing board. We got to rework some things. But as long as I think we communicate a clear pathway forward, you can continue to get better, then the game stays exciting, it stays fun because we're making progress in it. So Does anybody have any questions or anything on anything related to this part? No? Okay. Let's see. You know, and after we've really get the technique down in the match play, then it becomes, okay, let's start to work more and more on your strategy. Making sure you're using all the tools that you have and you're putting them to good use, using it the right way. So that's kind of how I think of it. And then with strategy and along the way, we need to start developing just the physicality. I don't know if anybody saw, I think it was, who had the big win today? Seed got beat, and Sinner lost to somebody whose name I can't pronounce. And it was a 5.5 hour match. So along the way, it just becomes essential that we get the conditioning down. At high school, I think I've seen max 3 hours. I haven't seen a 5 hour match yet, but 3 hours. So that's something we want to continue to build up along the way with athleticism. But to me, the biggest thing is get the fundamentals down and really understand it. So let's see. Let's talk a little bit just about practicing. Does anybody here practice with their kid? Okay. So my advice is, if you do not have a good handle on the technical side of the game and understand it, don't coach your kid from a technical standpoint. It's not worth it. The best thing you can really do is put out targets and feed balls or hit balls. Even if you're just feeding like this out of the basket and just bumping the ball because you're not that good at feeding, that works. Or you're underhand tossing. But picking out targets, places for your, just establishing a zone where your kid's going to try to hit to, that's fantastic. That's really good. One thing that I think you guys should all ask your kids to do throughout the summer is ask them to teach you the strokes. So if you guys can get them to teach it to you and they can sound coherent, it's going to help them. Like, they're going to retain it much better. So, the kids should always be trying to teach the strokes and the fundamentals that go with them to as many people as they can, because the more that they have to say it, explain it, they see what they're, if they've got an inconsistency of their understanding, it tends to come up when they have to explain it, rather than them just listening to me and they can nod their head. So, one other thing too I would say is, when your kid goes to hit, to make practice more effective, it's picking out targets, it's structuring kind of drills that they're going to be doing every day. They need to just copy what they do and practice a lot with their friends. And they can feed baskets to each other, those kind of things. And I would say the other thing is, kids need to play matches. I'm going to touch a little bit more on this, but just going out and hitting for an hour and a half or 2 hours, we see kids do this all the time. It's great, but they're often not kind of simulating what they need to be doing in the matches. So the match play type thing. And then the last thing I kind of would just say on practicing and getting better, we tend to see people get very concerned about what group they're in. A lot of you probably heard me say this before. I would just really stress, it will make zero difference how strong of a player your kid plays with if they don't have all the fundamentals nailed down from a technical standpoint. Once they've really got all the fundamentals down, then yeah, it starts to really matter what ball they're hitting off of, and then they need to start seeing faster and faster balls. But until they've really dialed in kind of the blueprint on every stroke, hitting with stronger players doesn't help as much as you think it would. In some ways, it makes it a little harder because the ball's coming faster and they're still working to try to get efficiency within their technique. So just be mindful of that. And the other thing is, I just think it creates a good tennis atmosphere. Stronger players willing to hit with weaker players, and then you get a good mix of people playing up and playing down. And the other thing I love about playing with people that are maybe you perceive as not being as strong as you is it actually puts pressure on you as a player to show up and play well. Everybody always plays well against players that they perceive as stronger than them. So you don't want to go in a route in tennis where you're always trying to take pressure off yourself by playing up. So anyways, let's go through a little bit just on tournaments. Really, for those that aren't familiar with tournaments, there's two bodies of that are pretty much running most of the sanctioned tournaments, the UTR and USTA. So I'd highly recommend, join both of those. Once again, playing the events is great, but if there's any anxiety, like I don't have my technique down quite yet, it might be good to take a little bit of break before you feel like you've solidified that. So, the other thing I would say, just in terms of just playing tournaments, is match play is a skill that can be developed without having to pay money. So, you guys want to make sure your kid, plays tons of matches once they've really developed skill. Or, if you're in the girls' season, we're only going to get so far in developing skill before their season starts. So we got to figure out kind of a nice kind of takeoff point where they really start playing matches, even if the skill isn't quite refined, because it's going to be important that they get some reps in before. The boys got a little more runway to really, they can be a little bit more lax on getting match play in this summer. But I would just stress to you, keep in mind, match play is a skill they can develop without needing to pay money to play a tournament. So encourage your kid to play matches when they go hit with their friends. That will start to build it, and they got to treat it like it's the real thing. And then every once in a while, sure, play a tournament or a match, whatever you can afford is fine. So I think we're getting towards the end. The one thing I want to say for those that I know are going to AF and some of the girls, I know sometimes coming from like that 8th grade into 9th grade where you don't quite switch schools, American Fork has a website where all the tennis is communicated. So make sure for the American Fork people here, you're going to Google American Fork Caveman Tennis. Coach Harrod updates the website. He'll have tryout information and stuff for you there, as far as that goes.
So we're redone.
You can go. No, you can go.
Well, I was just curious. So your technique, is it pretty much basic technique? Like I ever signed up for viewing tennis camp, I don't want to changing the basic stroke that she's, you know what I'm saying? Or
Yeah.
something different?
So, tennis coaches have a hard time agreeing on the ready position.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is kind of goes back to consumer education. When I heard the dimensions of the court, I started to see filtering everything through, does what I'm being taught make sense with what I know the dimensions of the court are? And if they don't make sense, I'm not probably going to listen to it. And I would venture that most high percentage of tennis teaching, I don't know how many tennis coaches could tell you the dimensions of the court in terms of the degrees and stuff. Some could, some wouldn't. But I just wouldn't take information from anybody.
But you?
Well, you have to agree that I'm right. So with that, yeah, and that really is what it comes down to. It's hard to get educated, because if you go watch one of the thousands of YouTube videos online, they're going to tell you X, Y, and Z, and they could say completely different. There's going to be all sorts of coaches that are going to teach you to finish like this.
Okay. Well, there's just hundreds of successful people that have had different coaches. I just don't want her getting like 5 different things and trying.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah. I think when it comes to just picking out a coach, you have to hear what their argument is and see who makes the most sense. And having 5 different, you can't serve 5 different masters. So it really becomes going down a road of, I kind of agree with what this person's saying, and then I'm just going to go do the work that it is. And if, that's my kind of point is, like, everything that gets taught should have a really sound idea. And, and I think that's kind of what happens is in pro level tennis, what we see happen, and this is kind of, to me, how tennis works at the upper levels of tennis. Very talented players, less than 3% of high school players will play college tennis. Less than 1% of college players will go on to play professional tennis. There is a weeding out system that naturally occurs that makes these players just pull through the ranks. They may have, with no credit to a great coach, have naturally hit the ball really well. And that happens a ton. There's just gifted athletes, and there are some high-level tennis players that got taught really well, and who can you tell which one's which? Not really, unless you really know their backstory of how they're taught. But what we tend to see then, though, is as the college players come out of college, they tend to go teach. Or at the former pro level, they tend to go teach. And the thing that took me a long time to realize was they developed a lot when they were really young and have very little reference for their developmental tennis of what really set a foundation for how they are as a player. And they tend to teach as if they were on the tour in their last few years or their last few years of college, which is a whole different animal than really developing what I would call the fundamentals in their game, if that makes sense. So I just would say it's hard to be a really educated consumer and stuff. So yeah. Does anybody else have any questions or anything?
I have a question about
Yes.
just their athleticism. Do you have a particular workout that you recommend for tennis players?
I mean, I think for as far as tennis players goes, I personally like a lot of body weight. I really think that there's a natural movement pattern that's pretty innate, and I tend to think that a lot of deadlifting, where the hips come under the rib cage, tends to screw people's natural gait cycle up where they move well. I think it tends to make the knee turn in more from this, and you tend to see more knee injuries, those kind of things. So I tend to think, anything that's forward motion, movement, and side to side is what they need to be doing, like whether it's running, lots of sprints with short intermittent resting periods and then sprinting again, doing a lot of side to sides, body weight, push-ups, those kind of things.
And
I
not
think
necessarily weight.
doesn't need to be weight, especially heavy weight. I think you can do a lot of it in the training because you need to stay loose and relaxed, and bulking up tends to slow down just some of the racket movement, stuff like that as they develop. So anyways, yeah.
Quick question about tournaments and matches. So would you recommend that, when they go out and play with friends, play a match, but maybe not tournaments until they've got those solid
There.
fundamentals?
I mean, I think they can play. Well, I think the way to think of it is it's a, like I said, I think the kid that won at Corner Canyon, 9 years of progression. He certainly played tournaments the whole way, after his first couple of years through the way when he's still working on things. I would just say, so throw some of those in there, use the match play. But if there's something major that needs to get fixed, that's like, I can't hit a backhand in, that's where you maybe say, okay, we can break a little bit until you really feel comfortable with that, and then play. But there's a lot of progression has to happen as you're still competing. So we're, gonna have to still compete, especially as you're preparing for girls' season, at the high school and things like that. I think is good. It depends what kind of time you can afford. It's like you look at somebody like Coco Gauff's forehand. It's like she's probably gonna have to take multiple months off to fix her forehand if she ever wants to really have a weapon off that side, and that's like a really hard thing to do at the professional level. It's like those kind of things it's hard to make a judgment call because it's not an easy one, but it happens at all levels, where they're still making those changes and stuff at the game, at that level of the game. So anyways, but
Can I just quick ask, what is your background in tennis?
yeah, so my background in tennis, I didn't pick up a racket until I was 14 years old. I was played a lot of baseball growing up and other sports. Really fell in love with the game. I think I fell in love with the game initially because it had zero pressure because nobody in my family played it, and I just really enjoyed it. But I got really frustrated when I was about 18 or 19 and I finished my high school, and I won my league titles and stuff like that in doubles, but I was still frustrated because I felt like I was a really good athlete, but I had capped out I hadn't capped out because of my athleticism. I'd capped out because my technique wasn't good. And so after school, I went back and I ended up joining a company called Peter Burwash International, and they're a tennis management company. They manage country clubs, hotels, that kind of stuff around the world. And so I worked for them and traveled and taught with them and really tried to develop myself and kind of answer my own question, which was, why don't I hit the ball as well as I think I could? And so that was kind of my impetus for getting into coaching. And yeah, really just have always had a passion for it because I think it's one of the more difficult sports where, most football players, you look at them, it's going to be their athleticism that's going to cap them pretty, you're just going to know it off their athletic ability. Whereas tennis, I don't know if anybody's seen Dwayne Wade swing a tennis racket, former NBA player. Here he is as athletic as can be, but there's not going to be many tennis players out there unless he really put in the time. So anyway, so I did a lot of coaching in Florida, California, and New York, and then came here about 5 years ago and started more working on the developmental side of juniors. Before I was a lot of country clubs and stuff like that. And so anyways, but yeah, and so what I try to kind of work on the end of, I try to think of myself as a technician in terms of the technical side of the game. really creating efficiencies so that you can develop and you don't have to go back to the drawing board down the road. So, yeah.
I'm just curious about players who get a later start, late middle school, early high school. Are there opportunities JV players, or is it kind of limited to those varsity players?
Well, JV is playing, I mean, I can speak more to AF's program as I know, but JV's, they're playing 8 spots on the JV? 3 to 4 singles and 3 to 4 doubles, so there's opportunities to play JV for sure. I know within the 6A. So, yeah. And I think the biggest thing for me was realizing too, development in your tennis game doesn't have to stop because you graduated high school. It doesn't have to stop. Like, you can go play D2 school, like D2 tennis, D3 tennis is a possibility, and continue to elevate your game. So there's a 90 and over, championship that'll go on this year. So they're still early enough for that. So anyways, but.
I have a question about that because when we look on the UGR app, they have these double compositions. And it always says like any age, any skill level, any gender.
Yeah.
And my daughter's like, Dad, we should do that. That would be so fun. And I'm like, is it really?
Yeah, we've had adults play. It really is. Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, is that really?
Yeah, I don't think Quinn Jones is here, but Quinn Jones has played in a few of his son, I taught his son, and he would come play in the UTRs against compete. So yeah, you really can. So anyways, but that's it for me. Does anybody have any other questions or anything? We're gonna wrap up, like tomorrow we got the filming for video. The goal is gonna be get your kid filmed, and they're gonna have to do their own video analysis on their own strokes. They're gonna kind of have to put together the principles that they're learning here with the online course, and then they can sync that up, and they'll be much better off doing their own video analysis, and we'll kind of go through them and do a review on it. But that's going on tomorrow, so I think most everybody here has signed up. But yeah, I think we're gonna have a great summer. We're gonna try to hit a lot of different components: the technical, the tactical, and we're gonna try to develop more athleticism, running, all that kind of stuff, because it's all needed to really be a good tennis player. So anyways, thank you. Appreciate it.